to have you here. This is Idrak's third event, third book discussion. I am Abdelaziz Zuhri from University Hassan First, Morocco. Rania and I have organized this event. Of course, there are always people, friends of us, who are kind of kindly helping us go through this. And Professor Khalid Arar is one of them. He's the leading figure here, yeah? So we would like to thank all of you who have joined us today. It's a pleasure. You know, today we're going to discuss the book, Latinas Leading School. It's an interesting topic, a very, very attractive title. And I am really excited to see how the event is going to fold. As I always say, this is not just limited to a book discussion, of course. And the most important thing we're trying to do through IDRAC, which stands for Education, Research, and Coaching, is to connect scholars and to connect people who are interested in improving education around the world, improving learning, and people who try to capitalize on lifelong learning. We together as scholars or students or learners or all the stakeholders when it comes to education, of course, have had an opportunity to connect in a new way, thanks to COVID-19. Of course, a lot of people wouldn't thank COVID-19, but I think there are opportunities that come with those VUCA times, as they call them, no matter how complicated or confusing they might be, but they have brought us opportunities to connect with people we have never dreamt of connecting with. So this is an invitation to all of you, and me included, to connect through this event, to build relationships that transcend all the types of boundaries, no matter what type of boundaries they are, whether they are physical or non-physical, into creating new spaces and at the same time boosting our own learning as human beings in this universe, because we never know where that might take us. So as I always tell my students nowadays and people when we discuss issues, of course, today we are more than any time aware that any action, nowhere it is in the world, wherever it is, wherever it might take place. And when we say action, it's preceded by thought. Yes. So any action or thought that is undertaken or entertained anywhere in the world, we know that it will affect us, whether we like it or not. So this is an invitation, as I said, to all of us to connect together and to build those, let's say, not bridges, but relationships that will enhance our well-being as human beings in this universe and try to make it better every day through each one of us. So I would like to thank you so much for joining us. Your participation means a lot to all of us. As you can see in this slide on housekeeping, this webinar is being recorded and shared online on Facebook. I know I haven't taken your permission, but it's already there. So that's one of the things we're doing nowadays, but it's just because we want to share it with everyone who is interested in, connecting and learning. And as they say, the only thing that doesn't get, the only thing that grows through sharing is knowledge. This session will last for 1 hour and a half, hopefully, although we may wish to extend it beyond, but you know how time is important for all of us. Please share your name, affiliation, and country in the Zoom chat. You can leave comments or questions in the Zoom chat, because as I said, the most important thing here is to connect. And remember to mute yourself if someone else is speaking, please. And the tweet for this session is Idrak, as you can see. Rania is here with us. I thank her so much for the efforts she's been making to helped me, let's say, make this event a real virtual event, whatever. But Rania has done a great, huge effort, has made huge efforts last few weeks and to prepare for this event. Thank you, Rania. Rania, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abdulaziz. It's always a pleasure, anything related to book, to knowledge, to learning. So that would be something we all should be committed to. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is a great opportunity that we are not only talking about a magnificent book, but also it's in the week of International Women's Day. So while reading the book, I was saying, oh my God, that's a very good, kind of, yes, kind of celebrating all the great efforts and all the success stories that you will be hearing a little bit, kind of a taster, so that we encourage you to read the book and to know more and more about it. We're going to have a brief introduction about the book by the two editors. Then also we're going to have kind of a discussion, main comments, some of main takeaways that we had during reading the book. We might have some of the authors' comments, the authors who contributed within publishing this book, and at the end we will have a Q&A session. So please feel free to write your comments during the session. While I was reading, literally I was moved by your book. It echoed many of the experiences, not only the ones I faced. I'm not Latinas, but there are too many things that we can, it's just mirroring what we're facing in different ways. When I was reading each chapter, I would say, yes, this is the best chapter in the book. But when I go to the next one, oh my God, this is another one. The way that you combine the methodology, the findings, the storytelling, it's just attracting every single step with us. So today we're honored to have Dr. Melissa with us, an associate professor in educational and community leadership in Texas State University. Her role, she prepares and supports school and district leaders as critical practitioners, and you will find that clearly in the book. Also, her research focuses on issues related to equity, and you will find three main primary strands of inquiry related to college access, college readiness, and college-going cultures. Underserved communities. You'll also can follow her on Twitter to know more about her contribution. She's a co-editor of Latina Education Leadership, serving Latinos communities, and many, many of her contributions that she would be sharing with us. We also have Dr. Sylvia. She's a retired associate professor, formerly at State Tech University. She has lots of contributions. She helped more than shepherd, if that's the way, 25 doctoral dissertation students. She has lots of contributions, and Sylvia is part of the NLP, the National Latino Leadership Project, NLLP, so that people don't be confused with the other neural programming. Sylvia has articles published in Education Administration Quarterly and a couple of different journals. We are so keen to go through the book, and you will take us within that journey. So you have the microphone is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we want to start with, as you can see, we have a screen here. On the screen, you see the variety of individuals who contributed to this book. We have a total of 10 chapters, not including the introduction and the conclusion. But within those 10 chapters, we have the 10 stories about what it is to be a Latina educational leader, what they experienced here in the United States, as they tried to do their job, as they did their job. And it was very interesting to find out all of this information and how it overlaps with some of our previous research that both Melissa and myself have conducted throughout our career. Melissa, would you like to join in?
Sure. I'll jump in. So first, I do just want to say thank you so much to EDRAC for having us and for really helping put a spotlight on the book at an international level. Thank you, Khalid, Dr. Arar, for making that connection. I love that you all talk about, you know, the mission and practice is really about relationships and connecting individuals across the world. And I think for Sylvia and I think relationship and connecting is really at the root of the book as well, of Latinas Leading Schools. You know, I have always looked up to Sylvia, and she is really she is a leader in educational leadership when it comes to any scholarship related to Latina school leaders, Latina school superintendents. If you're doing any type of work related to women of color, you have likely cited her, or if you haven't, then you need to be. But needless to say, I was citing Sylvia in many ways through my work, and so I veered into engaging in some research on Latina school leaders, and reached out to Sylvia and realized this would be a wonderful opportunity to highlight what is often under-researched, under-discussed, undervalued in many ways, the assets of Latinas who are leading schools in the US in particular. And so that's part of the book. It's been a labor of love. That was one thing I told Sylvia. I said, I need to say that in this book discussion to really lead with the fact that it's been a labor of love. And so it's been, I think we started the journey in like 2018.
18, yes.
Correct, Sylvia?
Yes.
And it's been a great journey, a learning journey, which we can speak more to.
One of the things I wanted to add, and it echoes what was said earlier about creating new spaces, about where we can interact with one another and feel safe in telling our stories or in listening and being part of a conversation and dialogue about things that are important to us in improving our schools throughout the world, so that our children, our students can benefit from the richness that comes from having an education. And I think that's one of the things that doing this book, editing this book, and the whole process that we went through created that safe, free space that these women needed to tell their own stories, or to tell the stories of other Latinas that space had not been created or allowed to happen before we did this project.
Yeah, I think to reiterate what Sylvia's saying, it's not because maybe there weren't any publications at all about Latina school leaders, but it was never exclusive to Latinas. It was often, they might have been, a part of larger books or integrated in research, but we realized that there was nothing specific just for a space for Latina school leaders. Mm-hmm. And what we also realized was that there was an increasing amount of dissertations being written by Latinas or Latinos about Latina school leaders, whether it's school administrators, whether it's district leadership. We also think of leadership broadly speaking in terms of the book, and it was those dissertations were not necessarily in published works, right? So unless somebody is specifically going and looking in ProQuest for some dissertations, you're probably not going to find some of the rich findings from those studies. And so one of the things that Sylvia and I talked about when wanting to approach the book was of how we wanted to really be purposeful of inviting and including some of those works that were from dissertations, so that they could transfer those into chapters, and to also be inclusive of practitioners. So you'll see that from our contributing authors, we do have definitely some reputable distinguished scholars who've been in educational leadership, but we also have early career scholars, and we also have quite a few practitioners as well. The figure that you all see right now on the screen is something that we came up together. The 4 inner quadrants of the circle reflect the 4 types of sections that the chapters fall into. If you start in the lower bottom left corner of Testimonios del Campo, those are essentially testimonies. So there are a lot of firsthand accounts, and that's what our book begins with, some firsthand accounts from current and former Latina school leaders really telling their stories, and in many cases are taking a huge risk in doing so, because they talk about some really really pivotal moments that they face. They talk about issues of racism, of inequalities, and but they felt the need to tell their story. And so Sylvia and I found that those were the most compelling firsthand accounts. And so we wanted to start the book off that way and really grab readers' attention in that respect. And then the next section refers to comadrismo and the sense of comunidad. So Sylvia, do you want to speak to that section a little bit and what that kind of entails?
Yes, I think the next section of chapters really highlighted how important comadrismo or comunidad, the having a sense of community, either with fellow Latinas within the district, within the area that they could interact with, the importance of having those groups. It was that relationship with others who were in similar circumstances as themselves, and how that was a way of being able to be supportive of one another, of finding allies, of learning from one another as to how to do some things that maybe they did not know how to do in their administrative work, being either a first time or just coming to some situation where they needed some extra guidance to see how somebody else did it. And that really came through in the next set of chapters that focused on not only telling their story or telling the story of the women, the Latinas, but also the importance of having that community, that sense of community with others, was really prevalent or strong in those specific chapters. You want to go on ahead, Melissa?
Sure. I did want to just mention that in the section of the comadrismo and comunidad chapters, there was also just some really interesting methodological approaches that some of the contributing authors took. In one case, one chapter talked about or pulled from data from Afro-Latina leaders, school leaders, and they utilize this really creative yet very authentic approach where they created this dialogue of these Latina leaders sitting around a kitchen table. And so they were creative in the sense that some of the dialogue was directly from transcripts and the actual experiences that those Afro-Latinas had shared through research from one of the contributing authors of that chapter. But then they were able to transform and take that data and interweave that data so creatively and uniquely to create this this plática, this conversation, so that it almost seemed that these 3 women knew each other. So they, even though in reality they probably don't, right? Because they were participants in this study. And so we really loved that new methodological approach. And then there was another chapter in that section that really focused on this comadrismo, this connection, this sisterhood that was developed among an established educational leadership scholar, Rebecca Burciaga, and a colleague of hers, or comadre of hers, as she calls her. They met during their master's program. Ana Tavares, who is a superintendent in the New England area. And so how they really integrated some of their reflection in talking about, like, what does it mean in my role as I am a practitioner and Latina school leader? And then what does it mean for Rebecca, right, as someone who's preparing school leaders and talking about how they have commonalities in the challenges that they navigate. But anyways, that, to me, those were some creative aspects to those chapters that I thought were worthy of mentioning. But the next section was in relation to school community leadership. And so beyond the community that the Latinas created and felt that they needed with each other, there was this understanding that many Latina school leaders also operate from a very collective perspective, right? And so for them, being school leaders extends way beyond the boundaries of the school, physical space. And so how they just led with connections and wanting to connect with families and siblings, right? And so they thought of the role of family, and it very much connected to their own cultural values of family. Sylvia, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that what was strong to me in that section of those chapters was how dedicated they were to the inclusion of the community leadership and the community as a whole into how they viewed the school itself. So it was sort of like they viewed the schools beyond just what was at the school building, but to them the school meant also the community, the parents, and even the extended family, or some established businesses or other organizations within that community that all contributed to the success of those leaders, those Latina leaders in those schools, because their school, as it were, was quite broad, and it included their community, and it was a very natural extension for them.
I think the other thing to point out, if we haven't necessarily made apparent yet, is I mentioned, kind of the diversity among the contributing authors in terms of like their roles or practitioners and both early career scholars. But I think it's also important to point out that there was great diversity within this understanding of being Latina, right? So there was definitely not an essentialized, like Latina means one thing and that's all it is, right? We had the contributing authors were from different geographic regions. They had different, they were different immigrant generational status. They also included research from Latinas that were from Central South America, some that were Afro-Latinas, right? Different geographic areas across the country. So I think that's also a really big strength, because when we think, I think one of the things that we wanted to urge people in reading this book is that, yes, there's commonalities often among Latinas because of language, because of culture, but there's also great distinction among Latinas as well. So we don't want to assume that Latina means one thing, right? So to that end, right, the last section, the last 3 chapters of the book are, we kind of titled it Learning from Others, that section, because the last 3 chapters are all based on dissertation or master's thesis. So I want to put a little shout out to, all the students who are joining and watching this, that if you think, well, what am I going to do with my dissertation? How would I ever get it published? Or my master's thesis? Will anybody ever, read it? Well, there truly is a way to translate, and get your work out there. And so we're really happy to include some of this work. And two of the authors of those chapters are now faculty, and the individual who shared her master's thesis, is now a doctoral student at University of Texas, San Antonio. So we were happy to be able to include her work in here as well. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that one of the last 3 chapters is also the doctoral student taking the lead with her dissertation chair, helping her. So it was nice to see that mentorship happening and sponsoring that happening from a retired professor toward and with her a previously doctoral student that she guided and directed, and now that person is a faculty member, as Melissa mentioned.
So I want to share a little bit more of why this figure, what does it really mean? And we haven't really referenced some of the other terminology or key terms that are in the figure. I would say Sylvia really is the one who kind of, we were thinking through, we felt like, okay, what is really tying, these chapters together, and what are some of those key concepts that we can see through all of them. And so for us, this, I would say there's different meanings to it. So one, we saw the colored lines as threads, right? And we almost thought of it as, in Spanish, you could say like a sarape or a mantel, right? Where there's threads that are a cloth, where they're interweaving, right? You can't really tell which are on top, which are on the bottom, and that's almost, kind of purposeful, right? And they're also kind of continuing, they're kind of never ending. And then the other kind of double meaning that Sylvia and I talked about it as well was, we were purposeful in the lines that are, that kind of make the cross in the middle of what could be considered a circle or a plate, because that was the other thing. We thought it kind of looks like a plate and a
placemat.
And we thought that's also kind of another great meaning, because we thought that it also is representative of Latinas sitting at the table, right? We always talk about like being able to sit in a place and being included at the table, and in this case, being included in that table of leadership. And so that those lines are also not continuous, or they're more porous, so to speak, because we really believe that they those boundaries kind of overlap. So even though we identify chapters into 4 sections, we still feel there's a lot of overlap. So some chapters could really probably fit in others as well. But
for example,
speak to that, and then maybe some of the key terms.
Well, I was going to give the example of the overlap, is that learning from others and the testimonials. I mean, the testimonials were like from the people themselves, but the learning from others was from those two overlapped. And in terms of the colored lines, is what we call them as what Melissa was saying was threads, that throughout all of the chapters, we could see aspects of each one of these being mentioned or being highlighted throughout. For example, just starting at the bottom left hand, mentoring that matters. That was a thread that all of the chapters through one way or another mentioned that they had mentoring, or mentoring didn't happen for them. But what we found was that that mentoring was something that really mattered, and it needed to be a special type of, well, not a special type of mentoring, but mentoring that really facilitated the growth of these women in their leadership roles. Another one that we found was on the opposite corner would be the nuestros idiomas, which is the adherents are staying true to being able to their bilingualism, being able to speak the language that would communicate or connect with the community and with the students and their parents. And those two are some threads that, like, as I mentioned, that are throughout all the chapters. There's also the amor en poder and Latina ways of knowing. Would you want to explain some of them, Melissa?
Sure. I was going to speak to nuestros idiomas. In many cases, I think the other thing, because we talked about not essentializing, right? The reality is that Latinas, we're on a continuum, right? And so while in many of the chapters, yes, the Latinas that were included or or had firsthand accounts were bilingual, there was also this recognition that there are Latinas who maybe don't speak Spanish, and that may or may not be, that was maybe not something that was of their choice, right? In many cases, if we think of like the historical issues of discrimination in the US and in Texas, I'm thinking just my own context and how there are generations that were purposeful in not teaching their children Spanish because they didn't want their children to face discrimination, right? So I think that's the other thing to acknowledge. Amor y Poder was, we realized that all the Latina leaders that were mentioned in the book, they really led from Amor y Poder, literally translated is love and power, you could say, right? And so they really found, especially when they were faced with challenges, faced with various forms of isms, right? Racism, etc. What kept them going and drove them to continue was this love for leading, love for their communities, and then they often found power also is kind of this double meaning, and I think for us a lot of these are kind of double meaning. So power, that they found ways to feel empowered, but then also the powers that be that were holding them down in some ways, right? So it's kind of this double. And in that same vein, we noticed that there was a lot of resistance going on in terms of their work, and being able to resist, marginalizing forces, and then at the same time, them being able to remain resilient, and what they turn to be able to be resilient. And I think the last two we have is balancing and familia. Do you want to speak to those real quick?
Yeah. One of the things that was interesting is that these women did mention in some way or another the importance of balancing the expectations and the commitments and duties that they have of their administrative role, and as well as things that they had to do at home, being a homemaker or being in charge of taking care of things at home. And so being able to balance the needs and the expectations of all of the roles that they had, and they were able to do that in a very I'm gonna say gracious, but they were able to do that without much complaining. And they were also able to bring in one of the other threads was the importance of their familia, how they could depend on their extended familia to help them with some of those roles. If they needed, they could call on a sister or an auntie or a husband to go and pick up the children after school when they were not able to do that. And so that was part of the resilience that they had. You want to speak to the Latina ways of knowing, Melissa?
A little bit more, sure. I was just going to add to the balancing. I think I keep talking about kind of the double meaning, because in the other thing, the conversations that we had with some of the contributing authors too was, right, that the challenge of balancing, it wasn't because it didn't look all nice and neat, right? To like balance it all. But many wanted to be able, they wanted a family, and they wanted some, described their ideas of motherhood or being a parent, and wanted to be able to maintain what that looked like from their cultural perspective, but then also wanted to be school leaders and maintain that. And so that I don't want people to assume or think that because it says balancing that all of them did it fantastically or without any challenge, right? Yeah. So and so familia as well, right? Like often very supportive, but there were challenges too, right? Like, and so and Latinas ways of knowing really is this, we drew a lot on Gloria Anzaldúa, if you're familiar with her work, Chicana Feminist Ways of Knowing and Epistemologies, and the work of Delgado Bernal, and about how, you know, recognizing that there's issues of, there's cultural intuition, and that is often specific to women of color, to Latinas in this case, and how in many cases these Latina school leaders drew upon, right, this kind of sixth sense to help lead them and guide them and building those relationships with their school communities. So
Yeah,
I
Yeah,
think
they've shared a lot.
I think that you have taken us in a very interesting journey describing, you know, how you have connected between all those kind of chapters and the insights that you have taken from the data that you collected, and that you had woven it in a way that you had described this kind of piece of art that you're sharing with us. We can definitely go through the whole book within this very limited time, but let me just help you within the main points that you had also shared or acknowledged. I liked within the acknowledgement when you mentioned about your relationship all together and how you had translated this into a piece of art within this book. Also, when you mentioned about your husband, your late husband, Sylvia, I think, how he revised and helped you about will writing. So I was also reading that to my husband, sharing. He was telling me, "Why are you smiling?" I said, "This is something that you always do. You need to go back and to help us in a way." The testimonies took us within the past, the present, and the future. Some of them were really hurting. But as you had mentioned in page 29, I think, and I'm quoting, that we need to raise the level of awareness by knowing those living stories and being aware of those kind of simple things that we are having or we're facing. I like the way that we like the way that you had added the question for discussions at the end of each chapter, so that you would highlight more information and to help us to have this kind of critical reading. The way that you had described your journey within the editorship at the end and the process that you have taken, how you combine those and how you had classified them into categories, how you had linked between them, this is also inspiring. A role of family. It's not only about family involvement as leaders, it's not only about how we can follow, but also how you linked the dealing. You know, one of the ladies, or one of the stories was about taking her child to the kindergarten, thinking about the future and how she's going to contribute. You know, you're giving us this sense of, I need to do something. I need to take those into actions and start, you know, taking them into my own context. Dealing with emotions, the anger, and how it can help us to survive. You know, you had lots of things to share, but at the end, as you had mentioned, those stories, and I'm quoting here from you, also reflected some of the personal cost of pursuing their own dreams. So it's not only about sharing good stories or success stories, but we need also to be aware that there is lots of things to be aware of. So the first question that we will be asking you, what shocked you after this book? Definitely you had your own experiences. So what kind of things that you did not expect to have or you did not assume?
I think that one of the things that really struck me, and I'll let Sylvia chime in about this, was how I think our approach to the book and how it became so interactive with our contributing authors. And I have edited a book before, and I don't feel that we had that same level of interaction with our contributing authors, and they're just, I feel like everything that we describe in here about community and connection, that we have had it with our co-authors or contributing authors, because we met with them a number of times all together. They got to meet via Zoom because we ended up doing a presentation for the book for UCEA. And I'll just share, you mentioned Rania about, like, you know, emotion, and I have to say it was very cathartic, and I mean, there were tears shed, there were laughs that were had and connections that were made that I didn't expect to come from the process of editing this book, which is why I talk about it being a labor of love. So that was beyond, to say, the research and, you know, the findings, but for me, the process in engaging in the work with the contributing authors and many who are practitioners was really significant to me. Sylvia, I don't know if you want to.
In terms of being shocked or surprised, I think one of the things that, as we started to get to know the contributors at a deeper level, was the limited mentoring that some of them received after getting their dissertation on how to pursue a publishing, how to become a scholar, and how they really, it seemed like after they had completed their dissertation, defended it, and all of that process, that they were just dropped, and they were not guided on how to continue being scholars based on the work that they had done through their dissertation. And that was in a way surprising to me, but not at all surprising, because I have very limited experience from others on how to be a scholar or to try to be a scholar. And on the other was that that one of the contributors was just a master's level student. She was not at all a doctoral level student or even a junior faculty member or anything like that. That was surprising to me. But what Melissa mentioned earlier, the development of a tight community of us now, of scholars, of those of us, of all the people that are involved in this book. I want to echo what Melissa said.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Melissa. I was listening with great interest to the journey. Very, very exciting journey. Very interesting. It's actually, it's fraught with a lot of qualities for both of you to get together and think of this experience and launch this initiative, and as well the authors who have been with you through this. I think this is also not just it was not just a book project, but it was much bigger than this, and that's what we have been seeing through the stories that you have narrated. Actually, many questions may pop into our minds about the book that you have written. It's really courageous to, for example, think of a title that goes like this: Latinas leading schools. When you are writing a book, most people would have the idea of maybe selling the book across the world, yes, and thinking, well, no, I don't want to have this title, Latinas leading schools, otherwise other people are not going to be interested in it. So my question is, why would someone who is not a Latino or who is not a Latina be interested in reading such a book? What are some lessons they might draw, or at least some knowledge, or what would trigger their interest to read such a book?
That's a good question. I think for Sylvia and I, we have such a passion, and I think we, I was going to say, I think we weren't worried about whether it was going to have such a huge appeal, because we just really felt that the topic and the experiences of Latina leaders warranted this spotlight, warranted this space for discussion. But I think for me, us understanding the assets as well as the challenges that other individuals from other cultural and racial ethnic backgrounds than us face, I think is key to us, to our own cultural competence and growth, right? As educators, as leaders. So, you know, I would say definitely it should be of interest to anyone, whether you're Latina or Latino, as much as a book about, you know, African American or Black, you know, school leaders or women leaders, or right. So just thinking about how, especially in focusing on underrepresented or marginalized populations and communities and leaders, is really key to our own understanding to help address issues of equity and ensure that our own policies and practices in our schools and our districts are recognizing that, right, meeting the needs of everyone. But to your point, Rania, you know, you were talking about how you felt you related to some of the experiences of these women. And so truly, I do feel that these threads, even though some are written in Spanish and some are in English, are probably very relevant to women and other leaders of color, particularly around the world, right? So.
Sylvia, would you like to comment before I ask my other question?
I just think that I'm going to agree with what Melissa said earlier. We're really passionate about getting this book out and what the stories of them as women leaders in schools had to say. And I think with that is anybody else who would be interested in reading this book would find that that there is so much strength and so many practices and so many skills that these women possess, that it's sort of like discovering a new treasure or something that's been hidden, that a resource that they can access to improving their school situations. And it's something that they should become aware of. And I think this book would help them do that.
Yeah, we totally agree with you. But for example, one of my colleagues were asking me, why are you reading about Latinas? Are you, this question was up in there. So I said, yeah, because we're having this discussion and we have good recommendation and we're talking about school leadership and minorities. But when I was reading, I said, oh my God, they're talking about scholar activists. And they're talking about higher education. They're talking about student leadership. They're talking about community leadership, education, community leadership. So you had addressed many points within this book, many important points within this book. For me, why I was saying many who are working in the Gulf area, part of the Arab countries, we face something, like expats and locals. Sometimes you can't have specific positions because you are not a citizen, you are not a local here, etc. So in a way, it links, although we might not think in the same way that you had positioned the book or you had written the book. But on the other hand, I totally understand after reading the stories, yes, you need to address it for Latinas because they need to have the power and they need to have their voices heard in a way. So, we're still discussing the book. One of the main things, why I need to learn this language. I need to learn this language. So the importance of being bilingual, trilingual, multilingual, for not only culture relevant leadership, but it's beyond that. So tell us about this, please, what you have written within your book.
So yeah, I think, when Sylvia and I were first envisioning, our approach to the book and being able to express ourselves bilingually and inviting contributors to similarly, express themselves bilingually if that was, if they were bilingual, was something that we really agreed upon, because I'll speak for myself, but though I feel that for many Latinos, our culture is very much tied there. You can't separate our culture from language, right? And so there is this this great identity related to that, right? Or that bilingualism, and how though, Sylvia, I think if you want to speak to this, because we've talked about how in some cases, right, the bilingualism is viewed as an asset, though in the context of the US, being bilingual in Spanish and English has not been valued often, right? And so, Sylvia, I think we were talking about this yesterday about how if you are the only bilingual Spanish English speaker on a campus that has a community, you know, that speaks Spanish, that you can be seen as an asset, but then that you could also be overburdened, right? Sylvia, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes, thank you. Even though now in this millennium, the being able to be bilingual has become a bit more acceptable. It really hasn't been, but it's been taken advantage. People who were bilingual or are bilingual have been taken advantage of in terms of they might be the only, as Melissa had described, the only person on that campus who can help a situation on that campus between a non-English speaking person who is Spanish dominant and be the translator for that. Well, that could be the principal, that could be the assistant principal, or that could be the janitor, or that could be one of the teacher aides. But whomever they are, generally they're not compensated for that skill that they bring into the job situation. And so that minimizes the value of being to be bilingual. And that's that is changing because of the demographics that are changing here in the United States. And I believe that would be applicable to other situations wherever there is a dominant language and a minority language that are in that community. So I think that's one of the importance. One of the things that was mentioned, I think, at the beginning of our conversation was that we italicized all the words in Spanish, but I think you might have noticed that we didn't translate them. We just italicized that. And I really wanted to have it that way because I wanted the reader to take the effort to find a translation for that. I think most of the words, for example, testimonios and testimony can be easily translated. However, that may not happen throughout other languages. But I just wanted other people to try to learn a little bit, because I don't think there's that many that we put in there that they can go get themselves find a way of translating that word. And I think it's what Melissa mentioned about that there's some things that are cultural and linguistic that are just so hard to separate that there is no other way of doing it but to say it in the native word that we know. And one of those that is in the book, and it's in the title of one of the books, of one of the chapters, excuse me, is the word ganas, Ganas. And that means effort. It also means inclination. Like, I don't have the ganas, it's like something you don't want to do, but you don't have the energy to do it, or something that you really want to do, that you have to do it. And it's like, no matter what, I'm going to give it no matter. If you tell me not to do it, con más ganas, with even more effort, with more conviction to get it done. So I still haven't been able to find a word in English that I could use to translate what ganas means. And but I think most Spanish speaking people would understand what that word means and know what context.
You know what? I have just, I'm sorry to interrupt, Rania, but I have just learned something. In our dialect, in Moroccan, the Moroccan dialects, we call it Darija. We often say, we use an expression, we say, ما عنديش الجانا, which means in our dialects, it means I don't have Ghana. And I have never known what it means until you have spoken.
See, that's the beauty of discussion.
Exactly. Because
Wow.
we say I don't have Ghana, it means, but we use it as a dialect, as a Moroccan dialect,
Oh,
and
wow.
it means I don't feel like doing this. Okay,
Uh-huh.
it means I don't feel like
Interesting.
doing it. So
Yeah.
you see, at least that's what I'm learning.
Yeah,
Of
before you
course.
go to the next question or the next point, Abdulaziz, there's something very important you mentioned within the book. First of all, when the students had suffered from during learning in another language, and no one had paid attention for that, assuming that they should find a way, while that's not the case. And the second thing, when they said that this curriculum is not designed for me, so this is something also we need to be careful about our students, especially who's coming from different cultures, or they're not using the same language, or even the same accent or dialect, as you had mentioned, Abdulaziz. And one of the things that we really learned, for example, we as Arabs, when we write something, we need also to express our own terms. We shouldn't hide them. And this is something that we need to be aware, even as you had said, to even between brackets, italic, whatever. But we need to make sure that we're expressing within our mother tongue, and we're having this kind of powerful messages just to teach our own nation and others. That's something you also mentioned between the conflict between school leaders while they were sending messages in Spanish to the families, but they were not coping with the language that they were. There are lots of things within the book. Abdulaziz.
Yes, well, that's why I said at the beginning that this is not just a book for the sake of writing a book. There is some critical thinking that is, behind all the ideas that have been gathered in this book. And of course, as some of the participants have mentioned in the chat box, it's also about decolonizing praxis or decolonizing discourse, this critical discourse analysis. And at the same time, that's why, we need people like Melissa, Sylvia, and the authors who have worked with them, and people like Professor Anne Lopez. We salute her, she's here with us, and others who are also interested in decolonizing praxis. And Professor Khalid also has worked on this. And we have had a conference around decolonizing praxis. It's interesting to really delve into these issues as we unveil and unravel many struggles that might not be apparent. And at the same time, once you unveil them, people get surprised, saying, "Oh my God, I didn't know that." Like, not knowing that someone who is a bilingual might have struggled or might have been used in a way that might not value them as human beings and as individuals. So that's why it's interesting to shed light on such a book. I don't know what question should I choose anyway, Rania, but let's talk about the leadership in juxtaposition with identity, and the theories that you have dealt with in this book, or the lessons that you have learned in terms of theory and knowledge. What can you share with us in this sense?
Yeah, I think that we realized that a lot of the theories, or common theories, definitely among all of the contributing chapters, definitely were more interdisciplinary and extended beyond the historical. Sylvia and I have talked about this, like the historical leadership theories that have been, more predominant, before, like social justice leadership or understandings of culturally responsive leadership. Most leadership theories related and reflected white male leadership, right, in administration. And so in our book, I think it is very much a testament to where our field is going in terms of educational leadership, and where I hope it continues to expand beyond just the discipline of educational leadership when you think of a theory that can be useful to ground our work in and expand our work. Yasso's, I know many folks may be familiar with Tara Yasso's work on community cultural wealth. Before the contributing authors didn't necessarily read each other's chapters really until the end. And, ironically, critical and culturally relevant and theories like Yasso's community cultural wealth was used in many of them. And again, without them knowing, there was no like collaboration that they did. They just were drawn to those more asset-based types of frameworks to help expand and understand the leadership that these Latinas tended to gravitate towards. Sylvia, do you want to add anything?
I think in terms of the theoretical perspectives or issues that can be connected to the book is one that it really does a good job, now that I'm thinking about it, a good job of almost totally ignoring the historical common leadership theories that are out there that are based, white male based, for the most part, even at the early beginning when there was lots of work on gender studies or women in educational leadership positions, it was still referenced back to a business model, Western frame, male, white, and we could go on with, heterosexual and all of that other stuff. But there is, this really just totally ignores that and goes on to using frameworks and theoretical perspectives that center their lived experiences. And I think it's just a shift. I just realized that. So I don't know if that answers your question in any way, but that's what I have to say about it right now. I'm sorry.
I was going to say that our concluding chapter 2, we really go back kind of full circle and talk about the inclusiveness and diversity of this understanding of Latinas, again, non-essentializing. And so we also rely a lot on notions of intersectionality and how notions of intersectionality can really help push understandings for educational leaders, especially underrepresented leaders of color or from marginalized communities within leadership forward, right? This whole understanding of intersectionality theory.
Brilliant. Before we proceed with our questions, we would like to ask you if one of the authors are with us, if they'd like to have a comment or two. And then we would also require, if you want to ask your question, you can raise your hand so that we can have turns, or you can just write it in the chat so we can direct the questions for Sylvia and Melissa.
So unfortunately, I don't think any of our contributing authors were able to join us. And remember, I talked about like their very geographic, some are in California, some are in New York, and then many are practitioners. So it's very likely that they wanted to, but maybe weren't able to join us. So yeah, I don't see anybody.
That's fine.
In
we
the
can.
crowd.
Well, we have some friends from Texas State, some colleagues from Texas State University, but they're not contributing authors.
Yeah.
They're just friends.
Dr. Khaled would like to start his comments and question. So be prepared, Sylvia and Melissa. Have your pen and pencils. Start, Dr. Khaled.
I can't hear you.
I want to incline on the comment why people would read this book. As one that even used the quantification language of researching the genealogy of educational leadership since the end of 60s up to now. So educational leadership as a scholarship has been developed and created mainly by lingua franca speaking, which makes only 8% of the global population. So think about it. 92% are either unprivileged, neglected, and their voices are not heard. So while saying that, we have been inclined in the sameness, while sameness implied imperial and colonialized epistemologies. So you are classified and you are visible throughout this lens and only throughout this lens. And what the book is offering is shifting from this sameness towards diversity. Everybody uses this term, you know, but we speak about diversity, then we exercise sameness, we exercise quantification, we exercise isms, structures, methodologies, and epistemologies, and other are neglected. Their voices has been represented by others. I can tell you, for example, that recently I have been analyzing the scholarship about educational leadership for refugees. Most of the scholarship come from Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking countries, while the refugees' voices were missed. So, having said that, this book brings to the fore the epistemology, the culture, the identity, and the self-space and agency, because these people are there and they are contributing to community and they are mobilizing community. Yet, this book is not about them, it is with them. It is not representing them, it's just letting their voices be heard. So what, you know, other scholars can learn out of this? If I go back to my published paper in EMAL, Educational Management and Leadership, and just look to the base words that I presented yesterday to my students. So I spoke about the double marginality that Arab women in the Arab world are facing throughout two regimes. One is patriarchy, and then the imperial regime. So their passage, their way, their pathway toward educational leadership is longer, and you will read the term cost. And when they arrive, they are expected to behave accordingly. And after 10 years, they can present their emotions, or they can lead with love. Lead with love. So there is a lot that resembles when we hear Latina stories, when we hear Afro-American stories. And I have been, like, in one of my courses presenting the epistemology of a scholar that is here with us, Ann Lopez. It is the same epistemology of being excluded, and throughout this regime of knowledge and structure and epistemology. And here we have a counter discourse, or we have a discourse that sparked And these women have visibility. They were there. They have been doing a job. And they have been informing and changing the community tectonically, let's say. It might be tectonically from underneath without being too much heard, but they have been doing the job. And this book and this scholarly works is very important in terms of uplifting, one, this community, two, speaks to or contribute really to the diversified words of different advocates and Latinas among them. And also we can learn a lot about the genealogy of change that they are leading throughout, their positions. And same to like Arab or women in developed countries that they are paying a price of first this double marginality and also for being advocate both in community and in-house. So they are, I think they are contributing to our community like much more than us.
Yes.
Much more than us as males, because they are in and out. They are juggling between two words, and they are doing this with love. So this is as like a comment to the book. And sorry for taking this time, but my question is, how you think their cultural identity, this Latinas women cultural identity, are given a self space and agency in Texas context, and what they do with this agency, if you can, elaborate on that. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, do you like to have one other question, or do you want to answer this first? Let's answer this first.
Sylvia, it's up to you. What do you think?
First, I want to say thank you for what you said. It's nice. Thank you very much. In terms of your question about cultural identity and the space that it's been given or being given in Texas, I really have a limited view because I have not been in the practitioner world for at least the last 3 years because I'm retired. And so my perspective is limited on that. And yet it's very focused on Latinas because that is the work that I do. And so what I can tell you is that the ones that are out there working are very tied to the cultural identity, the linguistic identity. It is something that you cannot take it out of them. You can't take it out of us. For the majority, I'm sure that there's some that are, weird out there, but well, not weird, but that are they don't identify culturally as Latinas or whatever, and they're just going about doing their work and doing the work quite well within the limitations that are put there by the state of Texas and the Texas State Agency and all of those governmental regulatory perspectives. And I think they're being ignored primarily. But as I said, I haven't gone to those grand meetings in Texas where many people are there and see how visible they might be. I'm sure Melissa might know more about that, and Jim, also would know more about what's going on in the real world.
The real world. I was gonna say a couple things. So yeah, I thank you, Khalid, for your comments and insights. I think you mentioned this a couple times, and you mentioned, you know, the double marginality, and in some cases it's triple, quadruple marginality among women of color. You know, if there's issues of class, issues of nativity, language, etc. Right, the layers. And so I think that does translate beyond identifying as Latina. I think that speaks to women of color across the globe. But in terms of Texas, and you know, your question you asked about, I want to make sure I understood it. So it was, you know, how will cultural identity for Latinas, and if they're given a space or, you know, agency in the Texas context, and I would say, I would argue that there's not a space given, that they are taking, that Latina school leaders are in many ways purposefully taking, you know, spaces where they can. And a lot of that, you know, I'm thinking of even some of our own graduates from our programs who are principals, who are teacher leaders, who are superintendents. And you know, I stay in contact with many of them, and in many cases continue to say, especially the higher they go, right, especially at the superintendent level, talk about how they still are the only, or one of the only Latino individuals in, you know, in meetings, and even less so, you know, a Latina woman in meetings across the state. So the changes that we'd like to see, especially when we think of the changing demographics of Texas, of the United States, are not changing in line. And we know this, right, from the literature, as for those of us in the US, and when we talk about wanting to diversify the teaching workforce, wanting to diversify the school leadership workforce, we know that you know, I think it's 80% or more of teachers and school leaders across the country in public and private schools and districts are white, and many are female. So, so yeah, I don't think that the spaces are yet created. There may be some districts that are maybe, we might consider them progressive, and they're truly engaging in equitable, in trying to create equitable principal pipelines, right? Then they would ideally have some practices in place to have that pipeline look different and be purposeful in the mentoring that happens from teachers, right, to get their masters, to get and move into leadership positions. But I would still say that that's still few and far between. I know from the educational leadership perspective, at least, right, the colleagues I know across the state, that is a goal for us. You know, at Texas State, I know that's a goal for us in trying to diversify our leadership pipeline. But yeah, I don't know if that fully answered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for both of you. Just maybe have to make a very, very brief comment contributing to what the book has maybe tried to do, albeit I'm not maybe entitled to talk about your intentions, but at least in terms of what I can see as a researcher and scholar, maybe just to try to draw attention to a kind of an epistemological perspective here in terms of what you have tried to do. This might be seen, or can be seen, as a book that it's a book that is driven by awareness, agency, initiative taken, and pride, trying to shift the lenses of research from the perspective of regulation or keeping the status quo to the perspective of maybe implementing radical change through research. Because as I said before, and the question was, of course, rhetorical anyway, when I asked about the title you chose, many people in your place would choose maybe titles that looks similar to something like leadership in education, or school leadership, or principals leadership. Issues like these that kind of resonate around the world. Yes, exactly. But in terms of why I've talked about awareness, once you are aware of this power dynamics that is kind of dominating our societies, you want to do more than just throw a book about leadership, another book about leadership, and sell it to people, and that's it. So of course that's a question of raising awareness and trying to contribute to change in a positive way. Rania,
Yeah,
I think there are more questions.
Yeah, we need to be cautious about the time, but related to those questions, I would highly recommend if we go back to the discussions, the questions at the end of each chapter, because there are lots of things related to education leadership preparation programs or school leadership preparation programs, and it's really interesting, especially related to identities. We have a questions related to the way that you supported or you also utilized the experiences of PhD students. Guidance beyond the institutional relationship for publishing after the dissertation. Is this an issue of interest, relationship, or institutional setup? This is one question. Another one is, help me, Abdulaziz, with the other one is about the language. That we are utilizing and going through them. The third one is about the identities and how we can help. And the fourth one is about how are you utilizing, how they are suing
within their new book in their classes, consulting or development. How can this book, the stories and the ideas, help us change the world? So that's one question.
So we end up with those questions, and we want a final comment from you before we end this session. Thank you.
Those are a lot, but I'm happy to try.
And
I know somewhere from my my dear colleague Miguel. Miguel, I don't know if you can unmute yourself. Do you mind maybe sharing or reiterating the first one about the PhD publishing support, or can you chime in?
Yeah, no, of course. First of all, thank you. I think both of you have done some outstanding work, and I'm a big fan of both of you. And before I get to your question, you know, I got to say that just this conversation, you know, it reminds me, and it took me back. I don't know why, just emotionally, right, to the days that my mother used to tejer colchas, right? She would weave quilts in the middle of the living room. And when that time came, you know, it was like the 4 kids and my father, we would clear the whole living room, and they would throw their assembly there, and all the comadres, you know, women would come in from the neighborhood, and they would just quilt. They would build quilts and give it to the kids or families in need. And so this conversation really took me back emotionally to those moments, because I think that in listening and I've just read bits and pieces of the book, it really is about, you know, the experiences of Latinas helping us reimagine and reweave a whole social fabric. Because yes, it is grounded from a Western world in school leadership, but this is about community building. And in our communities, we've experienced that the social fabric is so dilapidated that many of our kids and families are falling through the cracks. And so I really love the imagery, and I love the cover and the shifting of language. So just wanted to say that. Yeah, the question of PhD students and finishing, it's one that I am in tension with. I mean, I've chaired maybe over 25 dissertations the last couple of years. And the struggle I have is that every time somebody finishes, there's about 15 coming behind them, right? Yeah. And it is a tension of the struggle we have with so many few of us doing this work. And I love the students that I chair. I mean, the bond that you grow together is like very few others, right? And you continue the conversation, but I think the way that we have set up the way we share knowledge and the production of it is again colonized and very privileged for people who have the luxury of. But those of us that are committed to changing the world, we're off to another venture, right? It's like Don Quixote fighting the windmills. And we never change the damn windmill, and we always do it by ourselves. And so I think this is one of those things that we need to think about, right? About how we change the system so it is much more aligned with our students. But I don't have an answer. That's my question, right? How do we reimagine this? Because I think those women that are writing with you and thinking, and this is certainly a concern, there's a whole lot of other women and people of color that are in these conditions, and their work is brilliant work, and it needs to be out there. But the capacity of the system and the institution and the dogma is not aligned to be able to liberate and put those ideas out in mass production. Hell, I don't think the system can take it the way it is, and maybe it shouldn't, right? So maybe we change. So that was one of the questions, and I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Miguel. I appreciated the colcha. It made me think of, which is why I brought it up, about the community that was created in the process of writing this book with the contributing authors. I guess it shouldn't have been surprising to me, but it really was. I didn't realize how much we would connect and become comadres, for the most part. But to the point about that additional support, I agree. I think that the way the current system is set up, there are not enough opportunities and invitations offered to students to engage in research, to publish, to recognize the assets that they bring alone, that they don't necessarily even have to go outside to get data, that they are a source of data themselves, and recognizing how their own stories can contribute and expand our understandings of education and leadership. And so I was thinking about when you said that, and we've kind of talked about this at Texas State in our program, about how maybe we need to take and maybe we need to talk to other schools that are doing this. And I don't know if that was their approach, but doing a more collaborative approach to advising and what that can look like, and starting earlier as well, so that there's purposeful, collaborative mentoring and advising that every student is getting from the onset, right? And perhaps that could potentially help change some of that. But yeah, I found it, especially the contributing author who was a master's student, was so overwhelmed by how, they never thought that they could publish a book or publish something, a piece of their work, and were taken aback by it. And so we were, it was delightful. It was great to help make that happen. But I think one of the other things was trying to make this whole publication process like more transparent, and which is why the approach that we took to the concluding chapter, we were very purposeful in describing our approach, our timeline, what it entailed, because both Sylvia and I had to learn, like we had to talk to other people who'd done it to kind of get a sense of how do you approach it. So yeah, so Sylvia, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I agree with Miguel, that there's very few of us who can guide the development of future scholars. But it is something that we still need to do. Just because there's not enough of us to do it, that doesn't mean that we're not supposed to do it, or we shouldn't do it. But we're just going to get tired, or more tired than some of our colleagues. I remember being, when I was still at Texas Tech, that we had those discussions about how do we help our students become, get published, and including some requirements within the courses to have the students submit a publishable type of assignment, and how critical that is to distinguish probably between a PhD student and an EDD student, which is something that is different here in the United States than I think it may be different in other countries, but I'm not positive. I'm very ignorant about that. So in a way, that might be one way of doing it, but also even going through a dissertation and getting that dissertation done, I have realized personally that my dissertation was the worst piece of research I ever did. I got better after I did it in terms of being a scholar, a researcher, and being able to write it, and developing the skills to be a scholarly writer, being able to translate what I did in a dissertation into something that somebody else would want to publish and maybe read. It is a shift. It's a different way of thinking. And though I think we as our present day scholars probably need to think about how it is we did it, or how do we wind up doing it now? Because we're learning it as we're doing it. And maybe we should talk about that, and then maybe how we can incorporate that kind of thinking into the way we teach, and how we especially work and shepherd our doctoral students through that. And also realizing that, or except for me, some of the students that I really wished they had published their stuff didn't want to. You know, they wanted to be practitioners, and that's it. So I don't know how we go about doing it, but I do think we need to do it. So
yeah, I know that we're going beyond the time that we had designed for this, but it's an amazing discussion. And personally, I would just love to go further within discussing each chapter alone and taking this further. But regarding the point, because I just graduated in 2019 and completed my PhD. And one of the main things that encouraged me into publications, in different ways of publications, either in non-academic, if it's say, I tried to summarize my dissertation into a public book that everyone can read without or avoiding the methodology, etc., in Arabic, because I published in English. So this is something that we also need to start encouraging scholars about, you know, writing in their own language, publishing in different forms of publication, finding their voice and what really they want to contribute, because at the end we need different ways of sharing or disseminating those kind of findings. And within the chapters that you had also mentioned within your book, that there are lots of success stories related to that, either from the students or from the scholar activist, and how she's trying to bridge the gap and benefit from having the both domains, areas, eras, whatever that you're going to name them. For me, I'm a little bit worried about having practitioners and academic, because what I'm trying to do, I know it's difficult, but I'm trying to combine both of them, because we need to find different ways of dealing with people and having our kind of strategic plan for findings for publication and sharing. This had been an amazing discussion. I know that we're just encouraging the audience to read your amazing book. And if you want to have kind of a focused discussion for each chapter, that also would take us more than 2 hours. I tried to find a quote to end up with, but it's not only for Latinos, but and not only helping America, but it's helping the whole world. So we need to voice the experiences. We need to make sure that we're sharing those kind of success stories. And as we had started this discussion, this is a nice way to celebrate International Women's Day by mentoring, supporting, and the connection, the friendship between you both is giving a very good example of how we can do this and how we can share experiences. For our great audience, people who are following us, please, please, please save the date for 3rd of April and see that our next book, inshallah, going to be discussed within our series of discussions. Thank you very much, everyone. Abdulaziz,
Thank
if
you
like to
so
comment.
much.
Thank you.
Abdulaziz.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Melissa and Sylvia for joining us and talking about the book and bringing all the stories that have been included in the book, sharing them with all the participants. Thank every single individual person, brothers and sisters who have been present with us. I invite you all to Casablanca. Welcome anytime you want to come to Morocco. You see, you're welcome. So you just need to connect with me and you will be more than welcome. Of course, it's always surprising how books or discussions of books, how much they bring in. Such a book has brought in not just a conversation about the book, but you have heard a lot of things that might be considered emotional, taking us through different paths and discussing societal and social, political, academic, pedagogical issues, and so on and so forth. Of course, at the end, you have seen that the teachers or professors always have this feeling to help their students, thrive, which is a very good thing, and pushing them to success, and how you can kind of help them go through the path of research and publish and so on and so forth, which is an amazing thing. I've been blessed to be with you. Thank you so much. As I always say, this hasn't been just a book discussion. This has been a journey of discovery and exploration and learning beyond all boundaries. Thank you all. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. And hopefully, I hope that this conversation has helped some of you create relationships and connection towards more discussions and maybe further research that would help all of us learn for life. Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best.
For me personally, I will start having quotes from the book via Twitter. So stay tuned for the.
By the way,
Awesome.
we asked a question: how would someone who is not a Latino or a Latina read the book? But there are people who have, at least some Moroccans, who contacted me and saying, "Where can I find the book?" So, which means that the book is also, of course, inspiring and interesting to not just Latinas or Latinos, but of course, there are some people who can read between the lines and they know that they are going to find things that are interesting to them in terms of what they do in terms of research about leadership or whatever it might be. Thank you so much. It was a joy to be with you. And
Thank you.
stay safe, all of you. Wish to see you soon in another event. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. Thank you, Abdulaziz. Thank you, our lovely.
Thank you, Rania. It was really great having you.
Thank you.
And